Hey everybody, welcome back to the Personal Transformation Podcast. My name is Dan Storey, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is that feeling of fear and terror that you get and you experience anytime you're in an environment where you think you're surrounded by bigger, better, amazing people. And you look at yourself and you think, oh, it's just little old me and I'm not good enough to be here. That is imposter syndrome. And the research shows that around about 70% of the population experience imposter syndrome at certain times in their lives. And in this episode, we're going to look at some of those times and why they arise. What is imposter syndrome? How does it show up? Some of the problems it causes, because obviously we wouldn't be talking about this if it didn't cause challenges, both from an individual mindset perspective, but also a productivity perspective. And then ultimately, how can we battle, or how can we reframe imposter syndrome, move past it, and continue to be successful? So let's look at what imposter syndrome is, first of all. And it shows up slightly different for everyone. And I certainly have experienced imposter syndrome in different situations across my life. I've had it in a business perspective. I find myself in meetings that I'm like, how did I even get here? What am I doing? What am I going to contribute? And you kind of sit there and you're like, I'm not going to put my hand up. I don't want to say anything just in case people look at you and say, what on earth are you talking about? So I've had it in the business case. I've had it in the sporting context. I found myself on very successful teams and I'm looking at myself like, how did I manage to get here? Like, they're going to find out that I'm not that good and all those kind of things. And you start to question your own ability, even though in any other situation, you know you're talented. And then I've also had it in my personal transformation journey of becoming a bodybuilder. And those moments before I even had experience trying to say to myself that I was something that I was not yet. Anytime we set a big goal, we're going to have that feeling where my existing identity says this, my future identity is this, and there's a gap between the two. And so I know what imposter syndrome feels like, and I know what happens with the voices inside your head. And it's this idea that we're going to get called, we've got this fear of being called a fraud, that somebody's going to look at us, look deep into our soul and say, you are not good enough to be here. Get out, wherever out is. And so what do? We tend to shrink. We tend to play down. We try and hide ourselves away from those prying eyes that are really going to catch us out. And actually, anytime that we have experience, we're going to look at it and say, well, we're not really good enough to be here. And, oh, that was lucky. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. And instead of feeling proud to be in an environment, we end up feeling shame. And we have this fear of just being found out for being not good enough, or at least in our minds that we're not good enough. So what do we get imposter syndrome? Well, there's really three situations that arise that could lead to imposter syndrome. So let's look at those three. And I think the first one is a general feeling that we don't deserve to be in a situation, that we're not good enough to be in a particular environment. And the original research around imposter syndrome was done into women in education, women who would go to university and get PhDs and successfully study for years to become a doctor in whatever subject they studied. And actually what they did is they interviewed these women after they'd done their studies. And what they found is many of them exhibited this idea of imposter syndrome. And they would say things along the lines of, people, I'm not that bright. And, if I could do it, then anyone can do it. Or I was just lucky. Or, something happened. I was able to fool these people and make them think I was smart. And actually what they would do is they would talk down their own experience. They would say, I'm not good enough, even though they had the same piece of paper that other people would have that said, you're super smart. And anybody with a PhD has obviously gone through that process of proving to themselves and to other people how intelligent they are. And yet in that moment, they're trying to create excuses for why they feel this way. Okay, so there's a general feeling that we're not good enough to be in a particular environment, even if the evidence says that we are. The second situation that could arise that would lead to imposter syndrome is if the world or the environment creates situations that really level us up in terms of the game that we're supposed to play. And this could be something like a promotion at work, or if you become a parent, or if you're a sports person, you move to a new team, and suddenly you're captain, you have a leadership role, or something along those lines. And really you're in a situation where you may have skills, but you don't have experience. You have skills, but not experience. And so what people are looking for you to do is to solve all of the problems that now exist at this next level of challenge. You don't know how to, because you've never experienced these things. And what a lot of people will do is go panic and freak out and start to say, okay, well, how can we not get caught out here? And so they'll play it down and say, I don't belong here, or I don't have the skills, or I'm not good enough, or all of those kind of things. They start to panic. And what that looks like in a work environment is, they're less likely to do the things that are going to make them successful in that role. So they'll actually shrink down, they'll play small, they won't put their hand up, they won't volunteer to do work, they won't engage in career planning, they won't try and move into these leadership roles, or if they find themselves in meetings, they're not going to contribute ideas. And that actually then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They never get to be good enough at the role because they never do the things that they're going to do to get good at the role, right? They don't find ways to create that level of experience or find that level of experience and grow into the role. So that's one, is where the world creates that situation for you, say through a promotion or something along those lines. And then the other way that it can happen is if you create that gap yourself. And like I said, in my own journey from bodybuilding is, and we talk about this in the personal transformation blueprint, is that when you set a goal, if you set any kind of goal that's significant, you're going to have a gap. And the gap is from your current or old identity to that future identity of the person you want to be. So imagine this, imagine you set a goal that you want to write a book. So you call yourself a writer, right? I am a writer, I am writing a book, but you've never written a book. And so people ask you what you're doing, you say, well, I'm a writer. So have you written anything? And you're like, no, nothing significant. Or you put everything into that book. And there's a time before the book, that before you're technically a writer. You may write, but you don't feel like you're a writer yet. Okay, and so you have that, oh, I'm not a writer yet, but I'm writing. And so there's that dichotomy between you want to be the thing, but you're not it yet. Or like you're an athlete and you set yourself, like, I'm going to run a marathon or an Ironman or something like that, and you're training for it. You've never actually run it. People ask you what you're doing. I'm an athlete, I'm a triathlete, or I'm a marathon runner. Oh, have you done anything? No, not yet. People will look at you like, well, how are you saying that you're not that thing yet? And so there's this creation, the feeling of doubt inside that, are we actually that thing? Or maybe you're a business owner, but you've never sold anything. Like you've got this idea and this concept, but nobody's actually bought it yet. Like, do you have a business or you're not a business? Well, you are. You have to act as if you have to do the things that are going to make you successful. Because if you don't do those things, then yeah, absolutely. You're going to have this self-fulfilling prophecy that you are not that thing. So there's, like I said, three ways we can get imposter syndrome. Really, general sensation or feeling that we're not good enough to be in a particular environment. Secondly, is that the world creates a situation that suddenly pushes us into an experience where we don't have the knowledge and the actual background to solve that particular thing. We may have additional skills, may bring something very unique and specific to the table, but we don't feel that we belong. Or we create that gap for ourselves by setting ourselves a big challenge like a personal transformation. So again, what does it look like? Well, there's probably two ways that we react. I don't know, two ways that are negative that we can react, at least. So the first one that we talked kind of a little bit about is we tend to shrink. Okay, we tend to shrink. We tend to slide into the background. We try to hide rather than stand out. So we don't want to look incompetent, right? We don't want to be found out immediately that we don't know what we're doing. And so we'll do everything that we can in our power to not get caught out. So like I said, we'll go into meetings and we'll sit there and we'll listen and we'll nod, but we won't contribute. We won't put our hands up. We won't volunteer ideas. Or maybe we'll try and do something, but we won't actually take any action until we know everything is perfect. Yeah, and so we'll procrastinate, we'll second guess our own judgments, and we need 100% certainty before we can do anything. And in most situations, you're never going to get that 100% certainty, so we never take action. Or you just perpetuate the status quo and you don't rock the boat, even though people may have put you into that situation specifically because the boat needed rocking, and you won't do it because you're shrinking back. You're worried that people are going to find out that you don't have that experience and that knowledge. Okay, so that's the recognition. If you do those things, are you experiencing imposter syndrome? The other way that you could go from a detrimental perspective is you could say, no, I'm not going to show weakness. I'm not going to show that I don't know these things. In fact, I'm going to go to the opposite extreme and I'm going to have a false ego. I'm going to mask everything with bravado and pretense and arrogance. So people never actually question whether I'm any good at this. And you'll see many people who take a leadership role who demonstrate this immediately. I know the way, let's go this way. Even though exactly the same as the people that shrink, they don't have the experience. They just seem to pretend and try and battle their way through imposter syndrome. And neither of these are very successful, right? If you shrink and kind of go down to the level of hiding, then you're never going to get the experience that closes the gap. And if you create this false ego or this false persona of somebody that is overly confident, even though you don't have the skills, then people aren't going to trust you long term. They're going to look at you and say, okay, well, that person's just full of things. And so neither of those ways are terribly successful. Okay, so just be aware of that. There's probably some middle ground, and we'll talk about this in a moment. But some of the problems that arise. So, we don't do the things that are going to close the gap. If there is a gap in knowledge and experience, we don't do the things that are going to get the experience to close the gap. We don't challenge ourselves. We don't push ourselves to learn. Instead, we play small. We never actually grow in that role. And like I said, this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. We say we're not good enough. We don't do things that are going to get us to be good enough. Hey, guess what? We're not good enough. And so we stay in this treadmill, this loop of waiting and waiting and waiting until somebody finds us out. And then guess what? Somebody says, hey, you're not very good at this. You're like, I know. Okay. So here's the challenge, right? Here's the challenge is, if this is a thing, if this imposter syndrome is a thing that 70% of the people get, what are the other 30% doing? What are the other 30% doing? What are they thinking? How are they acting? That says, okay, well, imposter syndrome isn't a thing, or doesn't seem to be a thing for these people. And so the biggest thing is that they think differently. Okay, they think differently. They're able to see situations and reframe them in their mind, so they don't see this gap as a weakness. They see it as an opportunity. And I want to start with a quote. Let's use Muhammad Ali as a quote. And check this out. He says, "I am the greatest. I said that even before I knew I was. I figured that if I said it enough, I would convince the world that I really was the greatest." So Muhammad Ali had this idea, right? Before he was even Muhammad Ali, the one that we know now, the one that was super successful, he said to himself, "I am the greatest." He created that gap, but he kept saying it. He kept telling himself that he was the greatest. He was the greatest. And he was on a journey, right? He had to prove that, but he set that identity for himself. And that's what we want to do. We want to create or know that there is a gap, have the identity that we know we can be there, but we're going to take action that allows us to get there. And there's loads of quotes. I'm going to give you a few more quotes here in terms of action, because action comes before confidence. This is the crazy thing about imposter syndrome is, while you feel doubt and while you feel fear, that is the time where you need to take action. It's annoying. It would be nice if it's the other way around. Hey, guess what? You feel confident. Go and do things. No problem there. All right. But for some reason, the universe has flipped it around and challenged us. It says that action needs to come before fear. So check out these quotes and see if they help you in terms of understanding what to do in the face of imposter syndrome. His first one is by Tracy Ellis Ross. It says, "I am learning every day to allow the space between where I am and where I want to be inspire me and not terrify me." There you go. That space between where I am and where I want to be, inspire me, not terrify me. Beautiful quote there, Tracy Ellis Ross. Next one is, "A ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for." Listen to that one. "A ship in a harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for." GT Shed there. If you feel this way, if you feel like, oh, I'm just going to try and play safe, I'm going to stay over here, that's not what you're there for. We are here to experience life. Don't play safe. Go out, do the things. And then last one I'm going to give you here is from Dale Carnegie. And he says, "Inaction breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. If you want to conquer fear, do not sit at home and think about it. Go out and get busy." So there we go, Dale Carnegie. Action breeds doubt and fear. Action breeds confidence and courage. And that's really what we want to do. So let's think about, how do we get over imposter syndrome? So first of all, if there is a gap, okay, if there is a gap, let's admit there is a gap. All right, let's say we're now in a situation where we don't have experience. Great, that's okay. We're going to find this thing anytime we level up, and hopefully we're leveling up multiple times throughout our lives. So first thing is saying, okay, well, there is a gap. Like, you can't resist it. The first step in challenge in solving a problem is to admit there's a problem, right? So let's admit there's a gap. The second thing is to define that gap and actually get really clear on it, really honest, rather than being pessimistic and saying, oh, everything is terrible. What is the actual gap? Is it a skill gap? If it is, you can learn a skill, right? You can go and learn a skill. And maybe it's only a part thing. Maybe, you find yourself in that meeting, you have a lot of the knowledge, you have the experience, but you don't have the way to present it. So maybe it's a presentation element, or maybe it's a confidence thing. Whatever it is, how can you act a bit more confident? Okay. Oftentimes there is a gap. If you can admit there's a gap and then define the gap, it may not be as bad as you fully imagine. Now, if there is a gap, then the next step is to create a plan to close that gap. So how can you close it? What are the skills you can learn? What are the traits you can adopt? What are the things you can do, the behaviors you can engage in that are going to help close that gap? And then guess what? You're still going to have imposter syndrome. Sorry. Did you think it was solved? No, it's still not solved. You just create a plan. Yeah. The last thing to do is follow that plan. And like I said, action precedes confidence. Action precedes confidence. But what action is going to do is it's going to give you experience. Okay. And experience will tell you that you can do something, that you can be successful, that things aren't going to go absolutely horribly and terribly every single time. Sure, maybe you'll fall down a couple of times and, you know, skin your knee or scratch your hands or something along those lines, but it's not going to be terrible. You get up, you do it again. And gradually over time, that experience is going to give you the confidence to say, okay, well, I know how to deal with this. Yeah, I know how to deal with this. And that's what confidence is. Confidence is just a series of experiences that says, yes, you can be successful in this environment. And imposter syndrome, when you have it, you just don't have that experience. So go out and get that experience. Identify what experiences you need to get. What is the gap? How are you going to close it? And then go out and work as hard and fast as you can to close that gap so you don't feel like an imposter anymore. And guess what? As soon as you get to that point, yeah, you guessed it, something else is going to level up and you're going to get thrown straight back into that situation again where you have a gap in your experience and knowledge. But you've leveled up. Right, you've leveled up. And so I wish upon you a constant battle with imposter syndrome, but also the ability for you to very quickly reframe this in your mind to understand that it's only a way of thinking, that you probably do bring something absolutely amazing to the party, but maybe you don't have 100% of everything that you need, and that's okay. Do the things that are going to get you there. Action breeds confidence. Take the action to close the gap until you can feel very confident in that moment because you've had the experiences that give you that confidence level. So imposter syndrome is real. Like I said, 70% of the population get it. Reframe that gap. That gap is your opportunity for growth, opportunity for development. And it's the alarm bell that says, hey, you need to get a little bit better over here. Let's do it. And then let's level up again. Okay. So hopefully this has been useful. A good reframe on imposter syndrome. See you on the next episode.